Polite.
This week it was announced that the 13th Sookie Stackhouse book will be its last. Why does this feel like the right time for you to end this story?
Because I don't like to overwrite the series when it's exhausted its possibilities. I think we've all seen television series, movie series, and book series that have continued beyond their natural due date. And I don't want to weaken the series by writing books that have run out of gas.
Okay.
Is that number significant, though, the 13th? And that were you
No, but it's
thinking that
cool, isn't it?
Yeah.
The 13th book will come out in 2013.
Yeah.
Oh.
It all came together.
Yeah, it did. I thought, oh, there's just this symmetry about this.
Do you have any desire to perhaps try writing a TV episode or anything in the near future? Just because you're such a gifted storyteller.
Now, that was the right way to ask.
No, and I just...
I could just do anything.
Is that a medium you'd like to explore?
I'm not as averse to it as I used to be. I'm writing a graphic novel with Chris Golden, which will be coming out next year if we get our signals straight. And we've already sold that to England as well as in the United States, called Cemetery Girl.
Okay.
And Chris and I are actively working on that now. So I'm developing a whole new skill, not only in writing a graphic novel, but in collaborating with someone, which may not be my big thing. So hopefully Chris and I will both live through the collaboration, and I will have learned something new, and we're supposed to write a trilogy to complete the story.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you about the TV series in relation to the books, because I read a lot of the posts online whenever a new episode comes out, and you sometimes read people say, well, I didn't like that in the episode, and somebody will respond, well, if you had read the book. I mean, what do you think when you hear that, when people so vigorously defend your written word, even in a, considering TV is a different medium, and you have a very limited input on the actual TV series?
I think it's charming when people defend me so vigorously, even though I don't actually need it. I love the fact that people are really loyal to the books. I think that's admirable. I think you have to regard the TV series as a completely different entertainment entity with some of the same characters. Mm-hmm. It's an alternate universe. With all the same people in it, so to speak. Alan's got his own talented writers, and obviously he's got his own goals. But when I saw Alexander Wu at the premiere, Alexander's written some of my favorite episodes, and when we saw what the fairies really looked like in the opening show, I said, well, thank you, that makes up for all the white tutus. And now he just laughed. He knew I was waiting to find out what was the payoff going to be, because the clothes were just so ridiculous and over the top.
Now, the book series already had such a huge following and a lot of fans, even before it became the catalyst for True Blood. At what point did you realize that what you had helped create, this world that you helped create, had become this global phenomenon? What kind of event happened, or that you realized, my gosh, I'm responsible for this?
Well, when Alan invited me to come to the set when they were filming at Lake Bistineau in Louisiana, and I had never met Alan, and so myself and my assistant and my husband went down to Lake Bistineau, and when we got there, we saw trailer after trailer after trailer. There were people swarming everywhere. There were security guys everywhere, the actors, the directors, all the machinery. And my husband said, this is all your fault. And I thought, oh my God, what have I done? I felt really responsible. And I guess that was the moment I thought, well, things are really going to change for me, which was a true thought.
when they were talking about turning your books into a series, how did that process begin, and at what point did you decide your involvement, or was it decided for you, or just how that began?
Well, his people called my people. Really,
Yeah.
really. I mean, I know. I thought, okay, that's really how it happened, but actually, it was his people called my person.
Mm-hmm.
I had a person then. Alan, this is the story Alan always tells, that he was early for a dentist appointment and went to Barnes & Noble to try to find something to read, and liked the cover. So, yes, I love Lisa DeSimone, and bought the book and said, well, I'll just read a few chapters tonight. Stayed up and read 7 chapters instead of 1, and went back the next day and bought all the other books, which is like the Cinderella story. And I had several offers on the table then for the books. They had already been optioned once, and the guy hadn't been able to make anything happen. Thank God. And then when his option was about to lapse, I had three offers, which was, a deluxe situation for a writer in Arkansas, or any writer. And I had to talk to all 3 of the people involved to decide, which one I was going to give my favors to. And, of course, Alan was very persuasive, and I knew he got the mixture of horror and comedy that comprised the books.
I'm guessing that the characters that you create in your books are all kind of like children to you, and you probably don't like to say, I love this child more than another, but is there a specific character that you've created that you particularly have an affinity for, or that you really, really enjoy writing for that character?
Well, I always love writing Pam because she's so sarcastic and such a strong character. She's Eric's henchwoman, but she doesn't have to remain silent and subservient. So I really always enjoy writing her. But there are moments that I love to write all the other characters. I mean, they all have their turn in the sun, and I have scenes that I've loved writing that involve all of them.
Well, why don't we stick with characters for a moment? In looking at the series, has there been the way a character has been portrayed that has surprised you, or have the actors that have been hired and the way they portray them more or less lined up to your imagination and how you wanted the characters portrayed?
Okay, that's a multi-level question there. No one can look like the characters in my head because they've been living there for a very long time. That having been said, some of the characters do look amazingly like what's been in my head. Pam does. Andy Belfleur, Chris Bauer as Andy Belfleur does, very much so. I think the difference I've found in both the way Sookie is played and, oddly enough, the way she sounds on the audiobooks is that she sounds much angrier than I thought I wrote her. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking, am I angrier than I thought I was? Or is it their interpretation of the character? And I'm still not completely sure which it is. On the show, I've never really had an issue with what Alan's doing because I always know it'll pay off later. Mm-hmm. I did feel bad about Calvin Norris because he's really a nice guy in the books, and then he's a dead meth dealer in the show, and I'm going, there are some nice people in the world, But that's the story Alan's telling, not the story I was telling.
Mm-hmm. How would you say it is that you create, especially your female characters, lousy things happen to them, yet you don't really make them victims? If anything, in a lot of cases, it empowers them, what's happened to them.
Yeah.
How do you achieve that balance, like keeping them, conveying the lousy things that have happened to them, but not making them like, oh, woe is me?
Well, that's partly a result of experiences in my own life. I'm a rape survivor, and I hope I've overcome that successfully. And part of it's the fact that I'm writing characters that I would like, and people that I would generally pick as my close friends are not people who would curl up and say, the world is my enemy, I can't overcome this. There are people who would fight back.
because I find the books very empowering to read.
Yes. My job here is done. Yeah. No, I'm really glad to hear that.
Yeah.
What is it about the fantasy and horror genre that's attractive to you as a writer?
Truthfully, it wasn't I wasn't going for a genre as much as I was going for the story I wanted to tell, and that turned out to be a story that roughly fell into the fantasy and horror genres. At first, the book didn't sell. The first book didn't sell for 2 years because nobody could decide where they would shelve it. At least that's what I like to think. I like to think it wasn't because it was poorly written or anything, but it didn't sell over and over. It got turned down over and over and over again. Because they would say, well, this has really horrible stuff in it, but it's funny. Mm-hmm. And I'm going, well, that's life, isn't it? That's my life. So I didn't want to really change the tone of the books at all. But they would say, well, we don't know where we'd put it. And I thought, that's a pretty poor excuse for not buying a book.
Yeah.
Pretty poor excuse. But anyway, finally an editor at Ace was bold enough to say, sure, we'll take this book. And honestly, it sold very well from the very beginning, which was, a very different experience for me, and one I really enjoyed.
Now, I don't think I could picture the Sookie Stackhouse books taking place anywhere but Louisiana. What was it about Louisiana that made you decide to choose that as the setting?
Well, I'm a big Anne Rice fan.
Okay.
And one of the wonderful things about writing the Sookie stories is that she messaged me on Facebook. Isn't that really weird? But wonderful, I was so excited to hear from her. But she took the southern part of Louisiana and made it a character in her books, really. And I thought, wouldn't it be funny, this is just me, to take the northern part of Louisiana, the part that nobody wants, because it's totally unpicturesque. It doesn't have nearly the historical heritage that southern Louisiana does, and try to make something of it, and try to create a culture there that would interest people. It's almost like southern Louisiana had been done, so give me something that nobody else wants, and I'll see what I can do with it.
Yeah, there are very few references I find to New Orleans in it, and usually almost everything that deals with Louisiana, they're talking about New Orleans, they're talking about Baton Rouge.
Case in point. I thought nobody wants the northern part, so I would have it all to myself.
I'd love to get your thoughts on the proliferation and the popularity of vampires in fiction. Your small part in that. The popularity of the several vampire-related books and TV shows and movies.
Okay, I have a few thoughts on that.
Okay.
The first is that I think the proliferation is due to the success of maybe 3 or 4 writers. Because I think not only do writers read other books, hopefully they all do, and that'll spark something in them. They'll say, well, if I did that, I would do it this way. And then they think, well, maybe I'll write that and see how it works out. Also, there are some writers who write because they've read the bestseller list and they think, well, if vampires are selling now, I'll try a vampire book. I'm not saying that's wrong either. It's not wrong to want to make a living. But I think that as there'll be another bandwagon that comes along pretty soon, and the same writers will try their hand at that. There again, there's nothing wrong with it, but that's what's going to happen. I think also in almost worldwide economic depression, people always buy more fantasy literature, and I don't think that's you have to be a mind reader to figure out why. Also, I think, and this is my fallback position, in our culture, people's ideal is to remain youthful looking and healthy forever. We don't want to think about going on Medicare, Medicaid, getting a walker, getting our knee replaced. We don't want to get arthritis. We don't want our hair to thin and fall out. If you're a vampire, none of that happens. It's like the ideal. It's like the result of having complete plastic surgery. And I think that's very attractive to our culture.
What do you think about it? Because, as you're mentioning, like being specific to our culture and that, but globally. Like, your audience spans all over the world, and very different cultures, and people who have different ideals have still embraced it. What do you think is the unifying factor in your books, or what makes them universal?
Honestly, if I knew the answer to that, I would have done it years ago. I would have spared myself years of trouble. I have no idea why I struck the chord I struck. I can only be grateful for it and happy that people are getting some entertainment in their lives by reading my books. I just can't begin to guess.
Sort of going back to the top when you were talking about the last book, being a writer, you're never kind of completely happy with sort of how something turns out. So you see yourself as being able to just completely walk away from Bonton and these characters when it's all over?
It's going to hurt, but I'm going to do it. I've walked away from other series before when people would ask me to extend them, the Lily Bard series, the Harper Connolly, because I had nothing left to say. Mm-hmm. I've done it. And hopefully I'll create more worlds and more characters that people will enjoy just as much. Maybe. I hope.
I don't know if you had.
Well, I'll ask you about this. Is one of the things I really like about the stories is the real world. The collision of real world and fantasy, the notion that people know vampires are around, and it's yes. A really interesting approach to it, and even despite the popularity of the books and the TV show, it's an approach that people don't take very often in fiction. The notion that people know about vampires, and even something like the Vampire Diaries, which is now on, it's still hush hush top secret. So where did that idea come from?
Well, again, it was if I took that idea, I was a big fan of Laurel K. Hamilton's, mm-hmm. and in her books, vampires were more or less citizens of the United States. There was a lot of legislation pertaining to that, and I thought, that's an interesting idea, but I wouldn't want to write it from a vampire point of view. I would want to write it from a regular citizen point of view, and if vampires, in my logic, there had to be a compelling reason for people to accept vampires into society rather than saying, let's get the torches and the crosses and go kill those suckers. There had to be a good reason to believe that they wouldn't kill people. Mm-hmm. So when I thought about it very seriously, and I can't believe I do this for a living, I thought, well, they would have to have another food source. So gradually I came up with the synthetic blood, which has been tried from time to time, but never successfully. Mm-hmm. And I thought, but if they made a go of synthetic blood, that would be acceptable. And everything kind of evolved from that.
Yeah. I actually have a question for you. Sorry to jump in here. I was just taking everything you've been saying, and going back to when you were talking about the story, going and seeing all the trailers and trucks and everything that amalgamated to this show starting, and your husband turning to you and saying, you're responsible for this. I was just going back to that in my mind and thinking, the passion, everything you have for the series. Do you feel responsible for this world, and the way I was taking it in my mind was, because now somebody is taking the show with a bit of a different vision. Obviously, they're taking creative licenses on their own. If they take it somewhere where you wouldn't necessarily have foreseen, or maybe not even agree to, would you still feel responsible?
Ultimately, yes. I feel, in fact, for a while I thought, if the show doesn't succeed, I'm just going to feel terrible. It will be my fault. And of course, I've kind of rid myself of that. But I still feel like, when I think about my writing life, it's not just me anymore. They did a Wall Street article about me, and I thought, that made me feel so responsible. I mean, like I was carrying all these people and their livelihood on my shoulders, and it was really daunting and frightening, and made me feel very serious about my work ethic.
So you feel you've got the weight of this juggernaut on your shoulders?
I do. Though now that they've had 4 good seasons, it's considerably lighter.
Somebody
I
else
think they had their run.
Somebody else can take part of the responsibility.
Yeah.
Now it takes the torch.
Exactly.
So, in terms of wrapping up the series, then, are you going to feel that weight of the responsibility and all the people's hopes and aspirations that read you worldwide?
I do.
Will they be? Will you feel their sorrow? I know you're going to feel your own sorrow when it comes to letting go of the characters, but will...
I'm going to be feeling the weight of some of their sorrows. I'm not going on tour with that book, I can tell you that. I'm going to go somewhere where nobody can find me. Because there's just no way I can make everybody happy.
No, and in creative endeavors, I don't think there's any way you can make everybody happy. Because people will always envision different ways that they would want to take this story.
No, and they vote. Like, I get messages on my Facebook page and on my website every day where they say, one woman said, "I'll kill myself if Suki doesn't end up with Eric." I'm going, I'm sorry, I'm not taking that.
That's a very good example of responsibility, that sort of mindset.
That's her responsibility. That is not mine. I will not take that. I signed on, in my mind, the bargain between the writer and the reader is that the writer will do his or her very best to write the best book that he or she possibly can write and remain true to her own vision. The reader, the silent part of that is that the reader will go along with the writer's decision on where that vision will go.
Totally agree with you.
And you're not worried about a misery situation?
I do worry. I do worry about that. I got a really, well, sort of funny, in retrospect it was funny, email from a 16-year-old who said, and this is not cutting 16-year-olds because I raised 3 of them, who grew up amazingly. But she said, "But what's going to happen to us if you die without ending the series?" Not my problem.
You know what? I can kind of see what she'd be getting at, though, because there are a lot of series that continued. Like, I think of, like, V.C. Andrews and stuff like that
But
they're
if
still
I wanted
writing.
to end the way I planned, I better stay alive to do it. But just in case, I told Paula. So she's the only other person in the world who knows how the series is supposed to end. So it's not just me. Take Paula.
We're not leaving the hotel alive.